Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy,
where we're expanding the conversation around Catholic sexuality.
We're your hosts, Ellen and Kathleen. Hey there, Ellen here. Before we get started with this week's episode, I want to tell you about one of our partners, Be a Heart. Be a Heart creates modern Christian goods that bring the beauty of faith into everyday life. They have everything from Catholic kids' toys to lifestyle goods to party decorations and a whole lot more. Kathleen and I both own a ton of Be a Heart goods, and we love the quality and the creativity of the products. Purchasing from our partners helps to support this podcast and allow us to continue creating quality content for you to enjoy. So we'd really appreciate if you supported Be a Heart. You can use the code Charting Toward Intimacy or click the link in the show notes to get 10% off your entire order at Be a Heart today. All right, welcome back to another Charting Toward Intimacy episode. Kathleen and Ellen are here. I don't know why I said your name first. Like, that's probably confusing for someone who's listening.
I don't know. That's weird, yeah.
I'm Ellen. She's Kathleen.
Ellen and Kathleen. Never Kathleen and Ellen.
So today we are talking about the term responsible parenthood and the fact that we need to embrace this term as a Catholic community. We don't use this term enough. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time we use the term NFP to actually explain situations of responsible parenthood. And, we have so much difficulty with the terminology. People are like, oh, use the word fertility awareness, use the word NFP, use FAM, use FABM. No, there's a difference between, there's all this verbicide going on. And it's like, okay, let's look at our popes and let's see the words that they use. Because actually, Pope Paul VI in Humana Vitae, he doesn't actually ever say natural family planning. He uses the terms responsible parenthood, periodic continence, and natural means of fertility regulation. Isn't that a good one?
Right. Unlawful birth control.
Unlawful birth control. Yeah.
Natural law. All these are terms that he uses. It's funny. This is a good thing to talk about because I've been saying recently in the work I've been doing in my diocese for NFP and all that, I think we do need a general overhaul of terminology because it is so confusing between, having to describe, because if you're talking to somebody for the first time about introducing this concept of fertility awareness and NFP, you could have them Google search fertility awareness and get some not legit stuff, it is fertility awareness.
There's a surprising amount of fertility awareness educators who are, secular, who also, have womanhood circle meetings and bring crystals into things. And these are not
a whole there's a lot being tied into the natural fertility awareness stuff and some pagan practices and all this kind of stuff that you really have to be careful. It's NFP is fertility awareness, but not all fertility awareness is NFP. Yeah. Right. So, and I think that natural family planning, that term in and of itself doesn't really, it ties into Catholic connotation only because people are used to Catholics being the one promoting it.
Right.
But there's nothing specifically Catholic within the term itself. And I think we need something like that.
Yeah. And so that's why we are going to start promoting the use of the term responsible parenthood. We want to bring this to you. You might have heard this term before, but we hear this a lot that NFP is a tool. You might have heard this. We've talked about it on the podcast before if you're a longtime listener, but also a lot of other natural family planning and fertility awareness promoters talk about how NFP is a tool for use within your marriage. And it's sort of okay, but then what's the term then?
Right.
That we use when we talk about family planning from this Catholic human perspective. And that term is responsible parenthood. So I think the best place to start is we'll go ahead and read from read from the Pope himself. Pope Paul the Sixth, Saint Pope Paul the Sixth.
That's right.
All right, so this is from Humanae Vitae. This is section 10. It's titled Responsible Parenthood. I know you can find it. I trust you. All right.
Yes.
Married love, therefore, requires of husband and wife the full awareness of their obligations in the matter of responsible parenthood, which today, rightly enough, is much insisted upon, but which at the same time should be rightly understood. So he's going to explain this to us.
Yes.
Thus, we do well to consider responsible parenthood in the light of its varied, legitimate, and interrelated aspects. All right, so with regard to the biological processes, responsible parenthood means an awareness of and respect for their proper functions. In the procreative faculty, the human mind discerns biological laws that apply to the human person. Okay, what he's talking about there is fertility awareness, being aware of the fertility cycle, being aware of the fact that sperm plus egg plus cervical mucus equals baby. More or less. I mean, God also has to provide something there. But but you have to have those three elements in order to have a baby.
Yes.
Okay, now going back to Humanae Vitae. With regard to man's innate drives and emotions, responsible parenthood means that man's reason and will must exert control over them. So what he's talking about here is that we have to have self-control. We are not animals who are instinctual and have to have sex the second that we think about it. It means that we have to exert self-control, use our reason and will that God gave us to understand when we should and when we shouldn't have intercourse with our spouse.
And in the same way, though, I would flip it and say that sometimes we can have a little, like, too much unfounded emotion sort of causing us to be fearful of having another child.
Oh,
right?
Very good. Yeah.
You know, we can flip that and say, oh no, but oh my gosh, what about, how much this is going to cost? And I mean, we're in a good financial state, so like, it's not really a problem, but it's when you think about the finances of something, like it can be overwhelming that you're just like, no, we can't do this right now. I don't want to do this right now. And are those really, good reasons to put off having a child? That's another, thing to keep those emotions in check. And finances is just one example of that, right? But there's
right, and we're gonna get
emotions.
We're gonna get into the examples that Pope Paul VI puts out as well in just a minute. But I think that's really important is that this reason and will component, it means self-control, like on both sides, right? Self-control of your innate drives to have sex, but then also self-control over your, emotions on fear of sex. And that, I also just want to caveat before we keep going, that might mean counseling. Like, this is not, that might mean you need to go see a great Catholic therapist to get help with, self-control of your emotions. You might need that help, and that is okay if you need that help.
Absolutely.
Okay. And now here Pope Paul VI lays out some specifics. With regard to physical, economic, psychological, and social conditions, responsible parenthood is exercised by those who prudently and generously decide to have more children, and by those who, for serious reasons and with due respect to moral precepts, decide not to have additional children for either a certain or an indefinite period of time. That is a powerhouse sentence. Before we read the next two paragraphs, we want to really dig into this for a second. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about kind of from the middle of the sentence first. All right. So he talks about responsible parenthood is exercised by those who prudently and generously decide to have more children, and by those who decide to not have children, either for a certain or an indefinite period of time. Okay, so responsible parenthood is what all Catholic all married couples, but specifically Catholic, he's calling the faithful to responsible parenthood. That regardless of your situation, whether you are super fertile and get pregnant the second you think about it, whether you have trouble getting pregnant and maybe you really need to you have to focus on your nutrition when you're at that point, or you need to take extra supplements, you really have to try hard to get pregnant. Or if you're infertile. Okay, and let's talk about this responsible parenthood when you are infertile. He says, with due respect to moral precepts, we are called to this responsible parenthood. So that means that if you're having difficulty getting pregnant, that doesn't mean you can go and negate the unitive and procreative aspects that are inherent in the marital act itself. You can't negate those and go and do something like IUI or IVF, which separates that unitive and procreative aspect. It takes the procreative aspect and makes it the sole purpose and end, and takes that unitive aspect. There's literally no physical unity in those acts. So even every couple, regardless of your fertility status, is called to this responsible parenthood, because the responsible parenthood also means this. Remember that first quote, responsible parenthood means an awareness of and respect for the proper functions of the biological processes. So if you are respecting the proper functions and you are in your fertile time of life, the roughly 20-ish years that you're going to be as fertile as you're going to be. Well, actually it's more than that, but we'll say there's a golden 20 where you're really fertile, right? You need to work within the biological rhythms of understanding that. If you're past your fertile years, you have that awareness and respect for the fact that your biological processes are now working differently, right? Yeah. So this responsible parenthood thing, it covers the whole gamut of married life.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And, I think this is kind of pointing out the obvious, but he does those 4 elements that are really important that we consider. The physical, the economic, the psychological, and the social, those 4 things are really legitimate. That those are your guidelines, your points for, okay, is it responsible right now for us to try to have another child, or should we not?
Right. Those are the 4 also asking, is it responsible for us right now to avoid pregnancy? Yeah. Right. Ask that question. Is it responsible right now for us to have another baby? Is it responsible for us to not have another baby right now? And I recently had a great conversation with a moral theologian about, using natural family planning, and okay, what can we use it selfishly? Is it just inherently unselfish because of the, self-control and restraint that it takes to avoid pregnancy? And here's the thing. Pope Paul laid out, look, there are conditions that you need to kind of fulfill in order to need to use that tool, in order to want to avoid pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
Physical, economic, psychological, and social conditions. You need to consider these if you want to avoid pregnancy. Now, what he's not saying that all couples need to have as many babies as they can. In fact, he's saying the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
But he is laying out, look, you need to discern this decision. You need to look at your physical state. Okay? Are you healthy right now? Great. That's wonderful. If you're healthy, check that box, right? You're probably fine to have a baby. But now we've still got 3 other categories to look at. Economic. How, what truly is your money situation, and be honest with yourself about that, right? Be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
If having another baby means you can't do your vacation, I don't know,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But if having another baby means you literally don't have space in your home for another baby, or it means that, wow, we really need to update our car because it's falling apart, or, we've got all these bills, and having another baby is just like, we got to focus on our debt right now. Those things might be serious reasons for you. But this is so personal. That's why it's hard to really get very, very specific.
There's a lot of gray area to
There's
this.
a
It's
lot
not
of gray
black
area.
and white. And I think that we can really tend to be sort of judgmental and look at this in a black and white way a lot of the time, looking at other couples we might know or other families. And it's really, really important that this is such a personal thing. And we never know what God is calling another couple to.
Right.
And there's so much gray area. We have no business butting our heads into other families.
Never, never, ever. And what we're doing on the podcast, we're trying to give you examples to think about. We are not at all like trying to put judgment on your decision to avoid or achieve pregnancy. We're just throwing out examples that we hear from couples or that come to us, just in the ministry that we each do. Okay, so we've still got 2 more conditions, right, that Pope Paul VI threw out. All right, psychological. This is a really big one.
Huge.
This is a huge one. And what a gift that Pope Paul VI specifically wrote this out. He said, look, you got to look at your psychological situation. If having another baby is going to make you scream every single day at your children 24/7, that's probably not a good time. I mean, that's an extreme example.
You might be a little stressed.
Yeah, you might be a little stressed. And maybe the money that you would have spent on having the baby, like maybe that should go to a counselor. Right. Maybe you checked off the economic box, but you realized, that money needs to go elsewhere, right? And I'm sorry if this is your situation. We're not trying to make light of it, but we did make that very extreme. But you have to put that into consideration, but you also have to put that into consideration honestly. You need to allow the Lord to speak with you because he asks us to take up our cross and follow him. It never means that having a baby is going to be easy, right?
Yeah.
And you hear so many stories of people like, it never feels right. It never feels like, oh, yep, now is the time to have a baby. We have all of our ducks in a line. That's not what Pope Paul VI is saying. He's not saying you have to have all your ducks in a line. He's saying you need to consider these factors, and these are reasonable factors to consider and could cause serious reasons to avoid a pregnancy, right? Okay, and then we've got the last one, social conditions. Now, the fact that a pope in the 60s put this on a piece of paper is awesome.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's awesome because, he's really, he's appealing to our human nature. I mean, these social conditions that we have, the social conditions of, wow, I live in a city where my kids can't walk to school. That means if I have multiple kids, I'm going to have to drive them to school and back, or maybe I'm going to have to homeschool them. And that means that somebody can't work and, we don't have, our area has such limited, affordable, good childcare, or, these kinds of things. Those are social conditions.
Yeah.
Which also, they fall into psychological and economic places too, right? All of these things are interconnected, but social conditions are important. And we have to discern these things.
Another thing you can consider, and thank God it's not the situation in the United States right now, but I mean, think of people in Ukraine, right? In a war-torn country. Like, that's a major social condition that needs to be taken into account for those people living through that. And again, we say praise God. That's not a typical thing that we need to think of as Americans here in the States, but these things happen around the world, and NFP doesn't just apply to Americans, applies to everybody,
right? Responsible parenthood doesn't just apply to Americans.
Responsible parenthood.
and again, like, we really want to stress that you have to look at these decisions seriously, honestly, and you have to pray about them. And we're not saying I prayed about it, right? Oh, I had that on my mind today. No, you need to bring that intention to mass with you. You need to sit down in adoration. You need to sit down with your spouse, get the kids to bed early one night and say, look, let's do some serious prayer time right now. Let's do a rosary every day for this. Let's do the Divine Mercy Chaplet for this every day. Let's, you need to pray about it. Like, that's what we mean when we say pray about these things. It doesn't mean, oh, yeah. I'll just like shoot an arrow up to God and say, oh, yeah, just tell me, just let me know.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what we're talking about.
I'll tell you. So when what we have started doing with Shavanis's, we anytime we have a big decision we need to discern, we have started doing a 54-day novena, and it is a long haul. But the graces that have poured and the clear answers that have come from every 54-day novena we've done have been unbelievable. And even for intentions, with our sex life, it's been pretty incredible. So that's a big one. I'll throw a personal shout out for the 54-day novena. You got to commit.
Yeah,
but
you do have to commit. You have to commit
that
for
one,
54
but it's
days.
A powerful one. That's a great one.
It is. Okay, we've still got 2 more paragraphs of responsible parenthood, and we only have 10 minutes left of the podcast. All right. So, responsible parenthood, as we use the term here, has one further essential aspect of paramount importance. I love his words.
He's just like gearing you up.
Yeah, he's like, this is important, guys. It concerns the objective moral order which was established by God and of which a right conscience is the true interpreter. In a word, the exercise of responsible parenthood requires that husband and wife, keeping a right order of priorities, and he means right order of priorities here as in like you've considered everything he's already said, right? So you have a right order of priorities. Recognize their own duties toward God, themselves, their family, and human society. So that what he's talking about there is really what we were kind of digging into is you have to pray about these things. You have to consider them honestly, and you have to, sometimes you need to trust fall into God's arms.
100%.
Sometimes you won't check any of those boxes, right? And then you find yourself pregnant. And you're like, I have no idea what to do, right? That doesn't mean you weren't practicing responsible parenthood.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is you need to now step it up and really practice responsible parenthood.
Right. And I also say that, and I think you can speak to this as well, Ellen, that in our work in pre-Cana, when introducing this topic, it is like not a popular topic to be talked about amongst engaged couples, right? And it's something that the message that they're forgetting, that they don't really want to understand, I think a lot of the time, is that you have, as a husband and a wife in a Christian marriage, you have a duty toward God. And I think that pregnancy and family life and when to start our family and how many children to have, that's something that we think is just like our decision. It's purely me. It's what I want when I want it. And we forget that we have a duty to God as participants in this sacrament.
Matrimony means the call to motherhood. And we'll do a bigger episode on that. Don't worry, we will break that out. But look, guys, like marriage is go back and listen to the podcast episode called "Marriage is Ordered to Procreation" if you want to get into this a little bit more, because the words duty and obligation, they're so hard for us right now because our culture has just twisted their meanings. And this is hard for us too. Like, please don't think that Kathleen and I like have this all together. No. We're here sharing the struggles that we have too. Like the reason we come up with these podcast episodes is because we're like, we don't know what to do here. Like,
yeah, let's talk about
this because we're struggling with this currently, right? But yeah, we have a duty to God to bring our spouse to heaven. Like matrimony is is a call to motherhood, but it's also a call to holiness, right? It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah,
And neither is mother and fatherhood.
right, exactly. And let's just recall that, like, our children are God's before they are ours, right? So God has so designed the world that his children are brought into it through cooperation with his children, right?
Right.
Like so we have a response. That's our duty. That's our responsibility, is to literally build his kingdom, to give him more children. Um,
Right.
and you know,
And giving him more children can mean physically producing
mhm,
children, right?
yeah.
Or, the Bible says more are the children of the barren woman. What that's talking about is like bringing children to God means getting his children who are not following him
Hmm.
to follow him, right? Bring people with
Amen.
you
Yeah.
to heaven. Your
Yes.
next door neighbor, like responsible parenthood for you might mean getting your next door neighbor to come to mass with you,
Hmm.
right? It might mean like reaching out to your children who are grown now and trying to reconnect with them and share your faith. It
Yeah.
might mean, the person who sits next to you at mass that's totally
Yeah.
just checked out. Like you're called to invite them over to dinner and share your family life with them and your faith, right? Bringing children to God doesn't necessarily always mean bearing children. Like,
A phenomenal point. Yeah. Hmm.
all right, we've got one more
One
paragraph
more.
left of this definition of responsible parenthood. All right. From this, it follows that they are not free to act as they choose in the service of transmitting life, as if it were wholly up to them to decide what is the right course to follow. On the contrary, they are bound to ensure that what they do corresponds to the will of God the Creator. The very nature of marriage and its use makes his will clear, while the constant teaching of the church spells it out. And so what he's talking about at the end there is, I'm going to pull another quote for a couple paragraphs down, when he's talking about unity and procreation. Okay, the fundamental nature of the marriage act, while uniting husband and wife in the closest intimacy, also renders them capable of generating new life. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the very nature of marriage
Hmm.
is conjugal union, and that conjugal union, the very nature of the conjugal union is unity and procreation. So that's what he's talking about when he's talking about the very nature of marriage.
Yeah.
And its use, the use of marriage. That's weird terminology, but he's talking about, like utilizing the conjugal act, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that makes God's will clear, right? The conjugal act makes God's will clear. It unites and it procreates,
Create.
right? Like
Yeah.
our call as humans is to unite in community and bring children to God. Now, he's showing us that in the marital act in a very physical way, right? There's a physical unity and there's a physical bringing forth of children, but that concept of uniting in communion with other persons and bringing children to God doesn't always have to be physical, right? We unite as a communion of persons in mass as the church. We bring children to God when we do the corporal and spiritual works of mercy,
Yeah.
and invite people to come into greater relationship with our Lord.
Which is such a beautiful message for anyone struggling with infertility,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how am I called to be fruitful when I can't? This is how you can be called to be fruitful, right? Like by finding other ways as a couple to unite others, to build community, to yeah, like Ellen, like you just said, um, to bring people to God through a ministry, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what we always want, but it's another way of doing the same thing that God is calling us all to do.
So, in conclusion,
Yes.
we spent this whole time like really breaking down responsible parenthood, but what we want to offer to you is let's start using this term. Responsible parenthood is a powerful term. Like, it's awesome. And it explains everything that I think sometimes we want the term NFP to explain, right?
Yes,
but
exactly.
But NFP is always, it's typically oriented toward avoiding pregnancy, right? People don't really talk about it in as much in regards to achieving pregnancy. I mean, sometimes people do, but then they have to like clarify that and caveat it, right? And all of that kind of stuff. But like, responsible parenthood is this like beautiful umbrella term that we can use to really explain what all married couples are called to. So we want to invite you to start using this word.
What if we went to our doctors, instead of saying we use NFP, we said, oh, we use responsible parenthood?
Oh my
No one's going to fight you for that.
Yeah, excuse me. I practice responsible parenthood here. And the doctor's gonna be like, excuse me? It's like, well,
okay, well, that's good, I guess. Yeah,
I consider physical, economic, social, and psychological reasons when trying to decide to have a new child. And I always keep in mind the, moral law, I, with due respect to moral precepts, is what my husband and I are always deciding, Oh, try that next time your doctor asks what kind of birth control you're using. That'd be fabulous. All right.
Add us if you do that.
Yeah, seriously. Let us know. Let us know what your doctor says.
Oh, gosh.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.